painting from memory aids rearrangement, and rearrangement is the mother of pure invention. Convention is craft, invention is art. In art, knowledge assists invention. John F. Carlson, artist and author of Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. I've been on a journey to learn how to paint. Each day brings me closer to that goal, but it's a process where, I'm always learning. And one of the cool things about learning is all the amazing artists that have come before me, right? For each one of us, they have traveled the road to learn the craft, and they so willingly share it on this show. So that's the goal of this show, is to share their lessons, their art lessons, to you, to share the what, why, when, how, where, and who of painting. Now, your art lesson today comes from contemporary impressionist Christine Lashley. Christine's paintings have been exhibited nationally and internationally, winning many first-place awards for both landscape and figurative work. One such award she received is the 2018 Best Light in the Landscape Award at the Olmsted Plein Air Invitational based here in Atlanta. The co-founder of Olmsted Plein Air, Lillian Ansley, recently introduced me to Christine and invited me to attend one of her demonstrations, and I am so glad that she did. That experience was amazing, and it led to, today, this episode, with Christine graciously taking the time to talk with me and allowing me to share this conversation with you. Christine's love of all things in nature is poetically expressed in her paintings. You can't help but notice it. Plein air painting is a vital part of her work. Collecting memories outdoors is a big part of this. She intently observes the light, the atmosphere, even the geology and lay of the land. All of these things influence her work in the studio. The ideas she captures outdoors inspires the creating of stunning paintings that capture the beauty of a moment held in memory. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Christine, I was introduced to you by Lillian Ansley, the co-founder of Olmsted Plein Air. And I am so grateful that you allowed me to attend your demonstration. I was just blown away by it. It was fantastic. And there was this incredible moment where the whole classroom just gasped because the painting went from unfinished to transforming to this incredibly beautiful and detailed image. It just came to life. It was an instant transformation.
Oh, well, thanks. Sometimes it's like that. I have this idea in my head, and I guess I like to play with basically the foundation of the painting. So that I don't rush to the finish. And of course, for a demo, you are kind of supposed to rush to the finish because people are waiting for the bottom line. But I think maybe that's a lesson learned right there, that I kind of hold the last couple of punches in reserve to some degree, because you really have to set the stage for those moments. Because I've found let's say it's, the highlight on a piece of china, or, the fish in the pond or something like that, that is going to be a really dramatic moment that you want with thick paint. If it just goes in too soon, then it's often I have to scrape it off and redo it. So,
well, I'm just a beginner, so this is all new to me. So it's fascinating to hear you talk about that.
It's really one of the hardest things to learn. I mean, I've heard of people that said, I've tried not to be mean to my students, but I've heard of dramatic stories where people say, you're right, you didn't see me beating up my students in the workshop, hopefully. But basically this idea of scrape it down, restate it, scrape it down, restate it. I tried to emphasize the idea of let's push and pull the paint, because that doesn't sound so, I tried and I failed. We're looking for that good foundation, and that has to be shape, color, some texture, and not just reworking that area, but setting it up for those last couple of touches.
I'd like to explore that a little bit later in this episode, but I want to back up just a bit. I bought your book, and I've read several of the articles that have been written about you and by you. And what really stood out in my mind is how you're drawn to nature. Not only are you a gardener, but this is what I really found fascinating, is your interest in geology. This was something I can identify with when I was a child. And even now, I had a deep interest in geology and roadside strata.
Oh, how cool.
So I got to ask you, how does your interest in geology affect your painting?
Well, it really does, because I like information. I've always been excited about, how did that big boulder get there in the stream? And learning more about geology taught me that. So I know when I paint something, is that a granite rock, or let's say I'm looking at red rock, like in Sedona or something like that. The lines and the rocks that you're talking about, those happened at different points in time, and then water carved that away, or maybe there's wind erosion. So there's all those components, and that might factor in on paints that I choose as far as certain pigment, or it might affect, am I going to use the knife or am I going to use the brush? So yeah, I do think about those things, and it's fun to think about all aspects of the planet, not just, oh, look, I see a valley. It's like, well, yeah, did water carve that out? Is that from a fault line? How did that get there?
Or it could be something like glaciation. But where I live here in Georgia, the hills are a little different. I live along or near what's called the Brevard Fault. It hasn't been active in many, many, many years, but all this area is underlain by a rock. Well, a lot of people call it granite, but here in this area, it's actually called gneiss.
Nice. I know. Nice rock.
Yeah, I know.
No, I get you. Yeah. And there's topographic maps that you can look at. A friend was showing me this app that basically it helps you find a high point. If you know how to read topographic maps, you can figure out kind of the lay of the land and maybe where a vista would be. It would be a big help to know like where sunrise or sunset was going to happen, or, hey, that's going to give me my best view of the lake edge if I follow this little tiny dirt road on this topographic map. So I'm going to have to check that out. I think it was in Google Maps, and you can change it to topography. So I was the geology geek in me was like, wow, that's so cool.
So which came first? Was it your interest in nature, or did painting come first?
I think they both happened simultaneously. I mean, I would be fascinated by nature and then try to paint it. And especially in the beginning, I just remember I was one of those very unfortunate kids that I should clarify. I was fortunate in that I had the love of art, and I had parents that put me outside in nature, and that was what was very exciting for me. But I just remember the huge discrepancy in my mind. I would have this image of a beautiful grassy hillside or a rushing stream or something like that. And I just remember, even almost from day one, knowing that, wow, my skill set cannot make this happen. And so I was a little bit more introverted anyway. And I kept being very hungry for, how can I make that look better? What media can I use? And I just constantly wanted to get better, wanted to learn a better way to express myself. Because basically nature has all the answers. You can sit in one spot and do a dozen different paintings. The tree trunk is so beautiful. Look at the clarity of the water. Now we're going to have sunset. This is amazing. Oh, look, the moon is rising. There's just everything going on. And here's my clumsy skill set. When I was young, I didn't know how to work in watercolor, and I tried a whole bunch of different stuff. So it's learning how to draw accurately and then learning the media. It took a while to get my stuff together, I guess.
Christine, I have, when I browsed your book, I've looked at your website and looked at much your art. I saw what you did in the workshop. It seems like nature has taught you well, and that you were a good student of nature. It's really obvious in your artwork.
Well, thanks. I try to immerse myself in nature. I mean, I go camping. My parents have had this very remote cabin on a lake, and so I just spend a lot of time in nature, just looking, and it's important. Even if I'm working in the studio, I'm trying to trigger a moment where I was immersed in the scene, and hopefully I did a plein air study. But often I just try to tap into like that moment in time when I was struck by the visual thing that I was seeing and the emotions that caused.
So plein air is a big part of your work?
Definitely. I mean, I can remember some of my first plein air paintings, and plein air it's great just on so many different levels. Gets you outside looking, so you don't have the crutch of the photo. And, we can talk for a while on why I think photos are not good. I do work somewhat from photos, but just getting back to plein air, so you're getting educated on the colors, and moreover, plein air encapsulates the human experience of being outside. It's not a frozen moment. When we make a painting, even though the painting isn't moving, there's something about being outside that is, I feel like it's captured a little bit in even a clumsy study. I've taken students outside. I've done certainly all different types of levels of studies, whether it's a 10-minute study or a 2-hour study, and maybe one is better than the other. Time doesn't necessarily seem to matter, but it's the experience of being there, trying to capture what you see, and then having nature help or hinder you, because if the clouds are moving fast, you better paint your painting really quickly. And that can actually be a bonus because you don't have time to overthink it. You get really into this intuitive flow, especially if you practice and aren't afraid to make bad studies. Then you say, well, heck, there's the clouds, boom, boom, boom. And later it might be, well, look what was captured, that feeling of wind, the feeling of maybe a sudden storm coming up. And it can be a surprising moment.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the things I'm learning as I do more plein air painting is I'm not really out there to produce a masterpiece. I mean, it would be great if I did, that would be wonderful. But generally, they're tools that help me to remember. When I look back at a plein air painting that I've done, even though it's not a masterpiece, it calls back to my mind the smell of the environment, the temperature. What was it like? Was it a cold day, cool day, brisk day, warm day? The feel of and the lay of the land, the look of the light. I find that the plein air painting or study is actually a fantastic memory aid.
Exactly. It helps you meditate. It's like, it sounds maybe a little cheesy, but it's so true. It helps you meditate on that moment. You are living in the present fully. I mean, there's all types of things with meditation. And I am kind of interested in that. I don't meditate per se, but there's this idea of being fully present in the moment. And when you're outside painting, if you can stay focused on meditating on your scene, you actually take in more stimulus. You take in those varied senses. And they've done, I've just read some things lately. There's been studies done on how people would process a scene as far as, say something happened and the police are interviewing, well, did you see the suspect? What was he wearing? And so the studies have shown that people who are aware are going to observe and remember a little bit more than somebody who would, let's say, take a photograph. They don't, I'm not describing this all that well, but
I think you're doing great.
I think also it might have been a New York Times study that, I mean, let's get away from crime because that doesn't have anything to do with art, right? But it was, I'm reading this book called Visual Intelligence that a friend turned me on to. And they were talking in the book about people's perception on what is observed, but basically, how can you train yourself to observe more? And one is just being still and really taking in all of the details. So the things that you're describing, like the wind happening and the birds, those sensations are coming back to you because you were making art and you're fully present in the moment. And you're not thinking, oh, gee, what should I have for lunch? This is a great scene. Let me take a picture. And then you quickly move on. You stop and you are working on understanding that scene, maybe the color relationships or the shapes that are made. And so you're thinking artistically about it. And so you assimilate more as to the moment.
So it's meditation with intent. It's observation, connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm. And it's also relaxing into the scene. I think that that's really important, especially if with plein air, just like you said, if you set out to have a trophy painting, I think you could be setting yourself up for failure because it should be what I tell people, and this is, how to start basically. But let's quite simply look at it as, let's take a color note and put that next to another color note. So you can approach it as just color note of 1, 2, 3, light, medium, dark. Usually light is happening in the sky. And then you might have a medium such as a field of grass. And then usually the dark is the trees. So how could you relate one, could you just be 3 chips of color that you make? And that's it. So that could be enough to help you sort out your photos later because, you might assume, oh, yes, the grass was green or that was a field of wheat. And I know that's yellow. But in your color notes, especially if you do a couple of color notes for your field, maybe you saw some lavender, maybe you saw definitely the gold of the wheat, but underneath was kind of a caramel color. And your photos might not capture some of those nuances that you saw. So just making color notes on that and swatches of color can help you work on that later.
Wow, that's a great idea. I'm going to have to try that sometime the next time I go out.
Yeah, try that. And also try, so you could separate. So instead of making like a painting, you could do the color note thing. And then you could also switch gears and say, okay, I've got some color notes. Now I'm going to look for my big shapes. And again, a sky is a really great big shape. Usually the trees are collected together. So you could do like the edge of the trees without doing, it's always good to group things together. Like you could have a tree mass and try to make the top edge of those trees as varied as you can. And you could just have a lot of fun with that one thing and just with a pencil and just work on that dark mass. And how can you make that interesting?
So when you say use a pencil, are you talking about sketching in a sketchbook or are you talking about sketching directly on the panel?
Like you could do your color chips. When I do, but see, you led to another point, which is if we set out, let's say we set out with all our oil gear and we're going to make a couple of studies. So sometimes I just take scraps of canvas and put in a couple of color notes, sky, land mass, field, ground plane, far mass of the trees, and then the sky. And maybe that only takes 10 minutes. I've actually found that a sketchbook with my watercolors is just, first of all, it's really easy to transport. If I'm with people that are not necessarily painters, let's say I'm in Europe with the family and we're going to go to a hill town for the day. Am I going to bring my oils? No. What if I brought a little sketchbook? Yes, I could do that. And I have a little mini watercolor kit. So I usually take that for, the whole kit is about the size of, 2 iPhones, basically, little tiny sketchbook and a little tiny watercolor kit.
I like that, but I have to admit, I bought my plein air kit thinking that I was going to go and use it all the time, but it hasn't quite worked out that way. It's heavy, it's cumbersome, it's hard to carry around, and when I'm not motivated, I won't take it.
Right.
And I just don't want to bore my wife to tears too when we travel.
Right. Right. And it's just the other way to think about all of this is and I think you touched upon something important, which is the whole plein air kit is the intention of making a painting and making it good. So then we think, oh, that's going to, I have to drive somewhere, then I'm going to set up for 2 hours. So I have all of this time invested in this trip. And so you have to carve out, like by the time you get to your place, make your painting, and then come back, you're talking like 4 hours, 2 hours at the least. Whereas if you just have a sketchbook, maybe look at that sky shape, look at the shape of that cloud. That's so interesting. So that could be just a commitment of, 5-10 minutes just on your lunch break, maybe, or something like that. Especially for people who work and then they're like, they want to make a painting, but you get really tired when you get home from a full day, and then another day goes by and you don't do anything arty.
Yeah, you're exhausted.
Yeah, that's right. or even, let's talk about the office cubby. You might just could I make an outline shape of my coffee mug? Or, I have 5 minutes of downtime. I'm on my lunch break. I mean, it's just a way of keeping into the art realm with your brain. You just want to tap into something artistic. Yeah. Well, in talking about plein air, one thing, this has been uncharted waters for me. I always thought that, I could never work just from memory. Like artists who do that must memorize stuff. And I mean, the closest I ever got was getting better at drawing horses from memory. Because when I was a teenager, I was pretty into that. There were a lot of horses on the covers of my notebooks everywhere.
Yeah, that was nice.
So there was that. But there's this feeling of it could be a sunrise or sunset. There's this fleeting moment during the day, or maybe you're out plein air and the light is coming and the light is going. I've been challenging myself to work more and more from memory alone, not only to tap into the triggered moment from the plein air study, like we were talking about earlier, but let's say I have a strong moment that I'm experiencing. I'm just struck by the beauty. There's awe at what's going on. And it doesn't necessarily have to be dramatic. It could be quiet. It could be, like a great example is Carnation Lily Lily Rose that John Singer Sargent did. It was twilight. And yes, there was the glimmer of the light. But I mean, if he had taken photographs of that, it's just not going to have the same experience of all of those quiet values, the values that are so close together. And, he worked on that painting for years and redid a lot of it and had different people posing so he could get back to that moment that he was trying to capture. But the idea of working from memory, so I started thinking, well, here's an example. I've seen so many clouds, so many sunrises and sunsets, why couldn't I paint that? It's a definite moment. I know the sun is the brightest note in the sky. So could I paint this from memory? So let's say on a drive home, which A, it's not safe in a metro area to pull over. And B, usually you're pretty busy getting from, point A to point B. So you just want to get the drive over with. But let's say an amazing sunset is going on. So have notes in your head. Okay, sun is brightest, or maybe there's rim lighting on a cloud. Like decide what is your brightest spot in the moment you're experiencing. So therefore, life gets simpler. Everything else gets darker. So you have your, ball of the sun or rim lighting of the cloud. And then you try to identify those colors. And it's it's a good mental exercise because let's say you tell yourself, that's definitely cad lemon mixed with some white. That's my bright highlight. And as I progress outward, those last colors furthest away from the sun, my gosh, they're lavender. So sky is a really great place to start for memory painting because your lights are pretty well established. There's going to be one moment of light. And you can also use percentages. Check it out. The sky is 5% brilliant light and everything else is darker. And then you so look for your lights and then try to establish your darkest dark. Okay, it's that point of the cloud over here. So you see, it's a little bit of a house of cards. You want to ask yourself, how far could I get with redesigning the scene? And you would just be shocked. The best way to do this is to really test your memory and see how far you can get. Start slow, maybe just working, but maybe you kind of corral the colors a little bit. You're working with just the yellow and the purple. See how far you can get with maybe a more limited palette. But then you could start adding shape and you could really reinvent that scene. And it's fascinating let's say you go back to, don't look at a photo. Meantime, don't cheat and take a photo on your drive. Because let's face it, usually the photos are so depressing. Like, what? Why did I even take that stupid photo? What was I thinking? There's nothing exciting going on there. So the point is to get back to the excitement of experiencing that scene and how do you get there? So I feel really passionate about that. That's led to some really good things. I mean, if you think about really working plein air, you and I, Carl, we're out there, we're painting, the sun is setting, it's an amazing scene, we're excited, our palette is set up and ready to go. I mean, how much time are we going to have to paint that? Maybe 10, 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, very little.
Right.
And especially if you're chasing the light.
If you're chasing the light, that's exactly right. And so even if we could freeze frame it, and let's say it was the longest sunset ever, and we were really excited because we got some painting done. When you're looking at that moment, you're still making those decisions. You're looking for your lightest lights, you're looking for your darks, you're looking for shapes, and you're holding it in your memory for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds while you mix paint and put it on the canvas. And then you look back at your reference, you see? So could you extend that time? Could you extend that time to, I'm going to try to hold that in my mind for a minute. I'm going to try to hold that in my mind for 10 minutes. I'm going to try to hold that in my mind for a day. I'm going to try to remember something that happened last month. So yeah, I'm messing with my own brain that way. Yeah.
Yeah. That reminds me of John Carlson's book, Guide to Landscape Painting. There's a whole chapter, I think it's the last chapter in there, that deals with the whole topic of memory. As artists, I think we want to interpret what we see before us, or sometimes to combine elements of memory, or just do something straight from the imagination, or perhaps even a combination of both. Am I off base in that? Have I misinterpreted what you've said regarding that?
No, I think you're 100% on target because that's going back to what I started to talk about with photos. I feel like photos really encourage copying. I am trying in my current pieces that I'm working on. Don't get me wrong. Copying has its purposes for let's copy this shape. Let's learn about the twisting tree. Let's copy the shape of the boulder. Let's see if we could do that. Let's copy the stream bed. So there are things to be learned from photos. And like I said, I do work somewhat from photos, but what you're talking about goes way beyond that, which is the human experience of being in that space, trying to capture something, is not necessarily well served by putting in every single detail. So what we do is we want to prioritize the detail. And really some of the hardest work is what to leave out. And photos just give you everything, and they give you bad details too. So if you're doing a stream bed, maybe you don't need to see quite so much muddy bank. Maybe what you were really attracted to, and you would know this if you had worked from memory, all those really cool rocks that you saw. Maybe the size of that wide expanse of mud would actually undermine what got you excited to paint the stream bed in the first place. The water, the rocks, maybe a bit of green foliage. So you can downplay some of the mud. And maybe vice versa, maybe the mud made some really interesting shapes and that was your deal. But anyway, plein air and working from memory clarifies your vision, basically.
So it to me, it sounds like one of the skills that we need to learn as an artist is to develop the skill of reduction, taking an idea and reducing it down to something simpler. Now, I do like to use my iPhone. I use the camera all the time. I'm a photographer, so photography is a big part of my work, and I enjoy it. And, but I do have to keep in mind that it's a tool. It's one that has its place and it needs to be used in the right way with the limitations of the camera and the results. We have to keep those limitations in mind. Right.
And that's right. And I'd like to say at this point that, yes, I've had some pushback from my students. They'll say, I know, but this is in the photo. And I just want to clarify that, we're having a chuckle at that, but for some people, fidelity to the scene is very important to them. And so we do have to make allowances for, there's going to be photorealistic art. And if that's your thing, more power to you. But in fact, where I am is reducing some of that. I want less of that. I want to be mindful, like you were saying, of what do I leave out? How can I clarify my vision? What do I want to say? And one of the things that I've found, I used to feel almost guilty about that. Look at me. I'm sitting at the pond edge. Like, here's an example of my lily paintings, the thing that you saw for the demo. How many people have painted water lilies? And immediately when you say, I'm going to do a lily pond painting, people are like, you can almost see the thought balloon over their head. Oh yeah, like Monet. Monet did that. Yes, and he did it so well. And I was in his garden, and how dare I paint in his footsteps? But I absolutely love it. I love it so much. And I can't wait. It's just, everybody step aside because I can't wait to get painting on that painting. And it's just so thrilling. So why not? Just because something's been done before. In other words,
well, you're going to say it in a way that's different from everyone else.
Well, that's, I guess, where I'm going. I'm describing it, but basically, to cut to the point, is the fact that if it makes you excited, the more personal you can make your thing, whatever it is, that's what people respond to. That's what's going to, forget about style and all of that. That's something to be said for after you tap into what some of your personal vision is. Here's the scene. What are you going to paint? Your choice is going to dictate your style, your aesthetic, what you're trying to say, what you're trying to communicate with the viewer, because make no mistake, it's a visual medium. Yes, it hopefully will connect to the viewer. And in the beginning, I thought, well, I'm going to paint this. I don't know if anybody's going to get this, but I just am compelled to paint this. And what I started finding out was that, I was surprised. Okay, so for example, I did this painting. My dad had a bonfire going and he was burning some old junk wood. And I loved the way the smoke was rising. And I did this painting and I thought, I can never exhibit that. Like this, I called it the burn pile. Like, who's going to buy that? It's just, but I loved the feel of it, and the figure was really gestural. And in fact, I thought maybe somebody who works the land is going to buy that or whatever. But this woman bought it. That used to be, I had known her in passing. We worked in an office together. She came to my exhibit and she was like, I just love this painting. And I was just so excited. It was the moment that I realized that was my most personal painting in the exhibit. And I put it there because I liked it. And it was the first one that sold. And it was a woman who bought it, not some, person working the land or whatever. She's working in an office. And she said, I just love the feeling of this. And it's so beautiful. And it was a lesson learned that it's okay to make it really personal and do what you want. So
oh, wow.
I appreciate her very much for buying my painting.
yeah, that is so neat. What a great story that is. What a great deal of pleasure it brings us when we can create something. We may not realize it at the time, but it's going to connect with another person. That's so satisfying.
Yeah. And it's, it might take, I don't want to say instant gratification there, but, I guess a couple of months had passed when I had done the painting, but, sometimes it can take a while. You can feel pretty much alone in the art that you're doing, but I think it is important to get out there. And it's not that we need validation from the public necessarily, but I guess what I'm saying is you might be surprised that there's going to be more validation for your personal vision than just blindly copying something because that's what you think that you should do. Instead, find what you want to do, and usually people respond to that better.
Yeah, they see the joy in the painting that you did.
Yeah.
I know it's a balancing act because we want to paint what we want to paint, but we also want to paint for people. We want to do things that they will enjoy and are inclined to buy.
Right. There's a lot of stories about I think that's where the starving artist thing comes in. Oh, look, they were so misunderstood and now they're so famous. But anyway, a friend of mine put it really well. He talked about practice versus performance. And I think that's a really good way to look at. There's times when you're going to experiment with it, because I was very conflicted. And luckily I have some good art friends that I bounce some ideas off of. And so it helped me clarify that, it's okay that I made a mess of this painting. This painting's a guinea pig. I'm learning some new ideas. I'm experimenting. And it's so important not to be afraid of failure. And also just to, why not paint on that painting a couple dozen times? And I'm talking about not a big painting, although those get repainted sometimes, but, maybe this is just an 8x10. Maybe I'm just working on an idea and it's a failed, you could look at it two ways. It's a failed painting. It's a failed painting. What's the matter with me? Or you could say, well, let's try this. Hey, now I'm going to try this. I wonder what would happen if I did this. And so that's me practicing some new ideas. And maybe I hold something in my head. It could be the memory thing. It could be, let's say I'm trying to get some yellow trees maybe I'm trying out like a different color palette or something like that. So then when I have to do a performance, and you can liken this to a musician or whatever, you wouldn't expect a musician to not practice their scales, or they're not going to show up for a concert without having practiced it, even if they know it backwards, forwards, and in many different keys. So when I show up for a quick draw, my experimentation with those yellow trees, I might be attracted to, oh, check that out. Look at those yellows. Well, I think I'm going to try to paint that collection of yellow umbrellas based on that time I practiced extensively with my yellow trees. It's like triggers something, and then the workflow just goes easier.
I like this idea between practice versus performance. I know sometimes I feel like when I'm painting out in public, it's a performance, even though that's not what I'm doing. It's practice. I'll give you a good example. I was in Ridgeway. Ralph Oberg had showed me this place to paint. And I said, okay, I'm going to go try that. So the next day I went back. Well, it wasn't the next day, but it was a few days later I went back. And I had the canvas set up, and I hadn't even got started, and people were coming around and said, well, what are you doing? What are you saying? I want to see what you've got. Oh, well, it's a study in white.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm just freaking out because I'm not comfortable with it yet. How did you get comfortable with the performance?
Well, that's a great question. Again, my students, where would I be without them? I just don't even know. I mean, I started describing early on, I was very shy. I couldn't even, if somebody talked to me while I was painting, the mood was gone. My concentration was broken. And so I've had to just overcome that, because people really want to know, as you're painting, they want to know what you're thinking. However, so I kind of wear two hats. One is that I'm painting and I will share with you everything that's in my head, which is, I think, what a good teacher is going to tell students. That they want to know, why did you move the sky down lower to the horizon? Why did you do this? These are good questions to talk about, or even just to say, now I'm going to do this, and this is why. So how did I get there? I practiced a lot. Before classes, I would practice my demo over and over. And so that I could work out some of the problems ahead of time. And later, when I started teaching plein air, that was a little bit stressful, because of course you have to think on your feet. Here's my scene. Oh gosh, I planned for a sunny day, but it's not sunny anymore. What am I going to talk about? But it's a weird thing with me. I never thought that I would, I don't know if rise to the challenge is the right term, because I feel lucky that somehow my brain accepts this as a good challenge. I mean, it could be a bad challenge, right? And it could undermine a lot of stuff, but it gets me excited. I think I worry less.
Well, I think there's value in seeing that. This could be a
terrible painting. Yeah. And then, so just over time, I've learned to talk more and more, but I will say this, I said I wear two hats. One is the come, listen, understand what I'm thinking. And the other is, if I'm doing a quick draw, I have earbuds on. I don't want to talk about my history as an artist or why I picked that yellow for my umbrellas. I'm just going to be 100% focused on what I'm doing, because that takes, I'd say, the quick draw, where you have to create, usually it's about 2 hours for the quick draw at these plein air events. I mean, it's game on. Every second counts, every stroke counts, and I need to be in my own head. So I still can't chat when I'm doing the quick draw.
Yeah. Well, I get what you're saying about the performance art too. That's a time where you need to tune in on exactly what you're doing. It's kind of like the Masters are here in Georgia and Augusta. They're not going to allow someone to go up to the golfer, the pro golfer, as he's getting ready to putt and have a conversation with him. Well,
why did you choose that club? What's going on in your head? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nothing would ever get done. So there has to be, a balanced approach. But if I'm just setting up out at a local state park or somewhere and somebody wants to ask, I have to remember, okay, I don't want to be irritated with that person. It may feel irritating, mainly because I'm insecure with what I'm doing right now. But even if I were good at it, I would still want to be an ambassador to the art, if that makes sense.
I do struggle with that, because there are people who come up to you and they ask what might be, I think you're onto something. They might ask a question, like, what kind of question is that? But really, you'd be surprised. I mean, 30% of the population doesn't even know you exist. They walk right past an artist. And usually it's the kids that are like, look, Mom, that's so cool. And they'll say, are you an artist? And they're engaging with you. They're curious. They're interested. So an adult might say, they might say something like, do you make a living off of your paintings? Which could come across the wrong way. Like, oh, I guess they see my underpainting and they think I'm a rank amateur, you know. They might be right. Who knows? But it's this idea of, I think they're more curious about the process, and maybe they just don't know the right question to ask, but they're curious about it. And I do struggle with that. Like, do I say something nice and talk to them about it? I mean, often I will, especially if it's kids involved. But if it's for a plein air event, I mean, it's just, you have to create X amount of paintings and, you know, this amount of time. And so you have to just push forward. And usually pushing forward means a lot less talking.
I think the way some of these events are held, though, they're shown as being a public event. And so the public doesn't really know the etiquette that's behind that. So I can understand, on the one hand, a little bit of the irritation, but on the other hand, I want the public to embrace, you know, and understand better what's going on.
Yeah, because I think that's really important, you know, easel side etiquette for somebody who might be watching the painting. And this could be anything from somebody watching a demo to watching a professional at a plein air event that is trying their best to do a painting in a short amount of time. And I just think that usually it's okay to ask a couple of questions, but it's not really private lesson time. And I mean, we talked before about how it's kind of interesting when, let's say, somebody's never seen somebody painting outside before. And, you know, they're curious. They might blurt out the wrong thing, but they're just trying to engage with what you're doing, and they think it's really cool. But usually I'll just say, you know, I'll chat with somebody for a little bit, and then I might say, okay, I'm going to get back to work now, or the light is changing. And, you know, I might even resort to putting some headphones back on. But in a way, my job is a small piece of ambassador to the plein air movement. I mean, you know, hey, this person might be the future owner of your painting. You don't know, so you have to be polite. But I think if you just communicate that it's going to require focus and you're going to work on it some more, people will respect that.
Sure.
That usually comes across. Not always. I've had some interesting.
Oh, really? What's the most interesting?
People.
Well, what's the most interesting exchange that you've had?
Well, there's two moments that kind of stand out in my head. One was really early on when I started plein air painting. I didn't have a fancy easel or anything, so I was sitting on the curb, and I was, I don't know, I guess like, you know, 16, 17 or something like that. And, you know, I was really nervous somebody would come over and talk to me, and I really didn't want them to. But these people were walking on the other side of the street, and I got like really tense, and I was paying close attention to them. And it was a husband and wife, and she grabbed her husband's arm and she said, she pointed and she said, "Look, honey, it's a real live artist." As if we're all dead.
You had finally come of age.
I felt like saying, yes, I'm alive. I am. Here I am. I'm alive. Not all artists are dead.
That's right.
It was just so funny, her choice of words. Yeah. And then the other was actually fairly recently. Somebody who knew my work reached to a halt, pulled up beside me at a plein air event, and was just hanging on every brush stroke and asking me all about workshops. And I'm just not very good with dates. That's why I have them all written down. And I'm like, well, you know, if you look, here's my card. You can go to my website and learn more about that. What should I take for supplies? And finally I had to say, I'm in the middle of a painting, and it's a large one, and it's for turn-in for this contest. I'd love to answer your questions, but now is really not the time. You know, I tried to be, I just wanted to move on and work on the painting. And it was hard because I could tell they were excited about me and excited to meet me and excited about my work, and maybe we're going to take a workshop. And then they found me at another event because, like you said, at these plein air events, usually they have posted the artists are going to be here, the artists are painting, and it's to get collectors to see a painting. They see the scene, they see you painting it. It's so exciting for people who love art to, maybe they go to dinner and then they come outside and boom, the painting is almost done and they saw at the beginning. I mean, patrons love that. And it's great. It's so exciting to be able to share that with them. I love it too. But this person was again at my easel. They're like, I found you again. And I'm like, okay. And basically they watched me do the whole painting, but I did have to clarify, I have a limited amount of time on painting sunsets. So I'm putting on my earphones. I hope you don't mind, but I want to focus to be able to do this correctly. And I just had to try to get back into my zone. But yeah, I had a shadow for that plein air event. And it was, my friends came over to me later and they were like, is that person stalking you? And I had to say, I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think they're just very interested.
Yeah.
So, somebody else bought the painting, not that person.
Oh,
so anyway,
okay.
Yeah, that's kind of a long description about that, but yeah.
Well, I never dreamed we would go into this particular topic, but I'm glad we did discuss it because it is something that has been on my mind, and it's good to hear it from an artist's perspective as well. So it's a good balance there. We can all learn something from it. We love art, and we see artists at work. It's okay to admire their work, but remember, it is there is a measure of etiquette there, just like it is with really anything. I mean, that's true of any profession, anything that's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen guys, go up to a construction worker and want to know what they're doing on the roof, and but they're on the clock,
Right.
They don't really have time to stop and talk about, what they're doing on the roof.
Well, it's a fine line.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I have all the answers for sure, but and anytime you think you have something figured out, the universe is going to toss something else your way, I'm sure. So
that crazy universe.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm a woman painter. I have the advantage of from afar, especially if I wear my hat and I wear neutral clothing because I'm tall, people could think I'm a man. But I mean, I do think about the idea of I'm painting alone. I might be wearing headphones. I think about safety, and I talk to some of my guy friends, and it's not that they don't think about that, but usually it's good to have kind of a buddy system if you paint on location. And I have to say that at the plein air events, it's nice because we can check in and we can say to the organizers, I'm painting here. And it's double the planning because A, they know where we are, and B, a client could possibly come by and see us. But it's nice to have the backing of the plein air events. I feel like people know we're there. And I've even had police come by and say, oh, you're with the plein air event, all right. I mean, they're looking out for us. So it's good.
Well, that's good.
To think about safety. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame that we have to worry about it, but it is something we need to be aware of. Situational awareness and taking practical steps.
And maybe not, I mean, we were talking about inferring that it's people we would have to look out for, but also be aware of bears. There's a couple of times when people have encountered bears. I encountered a bear actually in Telluride, and it was in a neighborhood, and basically don't have any trail mix in your car, nothing in your bag. I mean, these are important factors to consider when you're planning what you're going to do. And because most people are like, oh yeah, I want a snack. I might get hungry later. Well, a bear could also come to visit. So that's not good. Yeah.
Now, Christine, you can't keep us hanging here. What did you do when you saw that bear? I mean, obviously you lived to tell about it, but.
Well, I lived to tell about it. That's the good news. But I'm telling you, it was touch and go there for a minute. I mean, you don't know how you're going to react until there's that moment in time. So I was painting and I had taken my glasses off to simplify shape. And all of a sudden I saw this brown lumpy thing moving towards me. And then I realized it was moving pretty fast. And I had luckily set up right under the shade of the hatchback of my car. And so in a split second, I'm like, oh my God, that's a bear. And I raced into the car and then realized, I was like, oh, okay. And all of this is happening, time slowed down. I had all the stress things, time slowed down and, a full body alert, every system was like zinging. And then this weird detached part of my brain was thinking, make sure you get a picture for the kids. And also, by the way, the hatchback is still open. And I'm like, oh my God. So I was so stupid. I don't even know what I was thinking, but I did. I got out of the car. I didn't even look for the bear. And I shut the hatchback and raced back. It was all a big scramble. So I'm sure I did lots of things wrong, but it was just instinct. I mean, I was like detached watching myself do this. I'm like, look at me. I actually got out of the car with a bear rampaging around. And later somebody told me you actually did the right thing because you were in control of a large object and you made a big noise when the hatch went down.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could have done so many other smart things like driven away. No, I didn't even think of that.
It's a bear.
I'm like, there's a bear and the hatch is open. Oh my God, I better close the hatch. So anyway.
That's hilarious, but I would have never thought about Telluride, but I'm not a Colorado native, so.
Well, they reported it to the authorities and, there was a bear that was, they're very careful about bears in proximity to humans and especially a bear that will charge somebody. Yeah. So the authorities were notified. And I think, there was a backstory there. Like it had also been spotted on the golf course nearby. So they transported the bear somewhere else because he was getting too friendly with people.
So
and it was only a matter of time before he found a granola bar and somebody's flag.
That's hilarious. I'm glad it had a happy ending.
Yeah.
But,
I know. And of course afterwards I was like in full shock and it was just crazy.
I can't wait for your new book on plein air painting safety comes out.
Yeah, how did we get off on this tangent? I don't know.
But it's fun.
Yeah, the bear story is like, the thing is, that was like my fourth or fifth time doing plein air Telluride. And I just had not, it's the wilderness just outside of town. And people that live in Telluride know about bear etiquette. And so I should have been more aware.
Christine, I read an interesting comment that you made. You said you could even say I was a teacher's worst nightmare. An unreachable student. Now you must have been quite a character.
Oh, I was so introverted. I was like in my little shell. Also, that helped me, I think, to be a better teacher in a way, because in the early stages of creating paintings, especially if you're a teenager and you're working through other stuff, it feels like people maybe don't understand your art. And I didn't want to open myself up to, I wanted help with my paintings, but sometimes I didn't want the help that somebody was offering. I was in a class, I was trying to learn about oil painting, and the teacher came over and corrected a line with regard to perspective on my painting. And I just remember being furious about that. Not because he touched my painting, but I hated everything about the experience. I hated the picture that I was painting. I hated that he didn't explain why he did that. And in my own head, I was feeling teenage angst and aggressive about it probably, and it was a really big moment. And, so I just remember what that felt like. And I think at the heart of it is I was vulnerable, but yet I was seeking answers. But because I was young and naive, I didn't know how to ask the good questions that would give me better results. And so I try to be respectful of students that are having trouble assimilating information. And, I've had some students like blurt things out at workshops, and I usually try to give them a little bit of credit, like, oh, well, they might be feeling a certain way. They might be feeling vulnerable, and so I think it's just helped me to understand, since I was basically the worst student ever. Everybody else is going to be better than me.
Well,
And I, not to talk down about myself as a teenager. I mean, oftentimes when parents will say, will you teach my child? I say, how old are they? And are they asking for help?
mm,
You see, that's a different thing. Do they want to be helped, or are they happy copying, X, Y, and Z? And I say, if they're happy doing what they're doing, then leave them alone. They're exploring art, and that's really good.
my brother-in-law. I was just going to say, my brother-in-law has a saying. He says, because he teaches wood turning, and he says, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. That's what that sounds like.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, it was only through, it was about 6 years ago that I decided I haven't been stubborn all of that time. I did have some good teachers. I had a high school art teacher who really, he had intervention in a good way for me. He helped me see things. He had me repaint things. I was not happy with it at the time because I'd had these other prior experiences that I didn't know how to handle it. And so this art teacher helped me to get better at being uncomfortable, to realize that being uncomfortable with self-edit on your art and creating art just to learn was okay. So that was the first baby step. And then it was really only later, after the kids were much older, that I thought, okay, I have this chance, this point, and it was very scary, but I thought, I'd been doing a little bit of teaching. I was doing children's portraits at the time, and my kids were young and they were at home, but then they were getting older. And I thought, okay, I have this point in time. I can travel. This plein air movement is happening. I would love to be a part of that. Wouldn't it be great if I could actually do a plein air event? So I tried putting myself out there. It's scary to, put yourself out there and basically reach for the stars. And then I thought, well, what am I afraid of? I would rather try and fail and just see what happens. And so I was lucky, and I got into a few plein air events, and I loved it so much. I thought, I just want to get better. And I don't want to get better for, not say like winning awards or things like that, but there was something that happened painting with peers that was, these are peers I really looked up to. Like, I have read about some of these people in magazines, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm painting elbow to elbow with so-and-so. I just can't even believe this. But they were real people. They were friendly. They offered advice. It was just a wonderful world, and I wanted more of it. And I realized a couple of things about my art. I realized I could be better. I was just so starving for information all of a sudden. So everything changed. I assumed I knew nothing. I wanted to go back to studying older books. I took workshops, and I had the good fortune to study with a number of really talented people, including Scott Christensen. I have to give him credit for really just opening my eyes to the mountain of information that is out there it's just a feast, John Carlson, Edgar Payne, and all of the people that we can learn from, Andrew Loomis. These are amazing people that have such terrific books, and even the art philosophy of, the artist spirit, and there's just a lot of good books. I mentioned Visual Intelligence. Another friend of mine turned me on to that, but it's a great journey. I mean, you could just keep learning. And I even had a student ask me once, well, this is all really great, but when do I get there? Like, how do I get there? And then they were talking about like finishing the journey. And I'm like, well, good news and bad news. And it's all good news, really. You never get there. You're always learning. And if you're not learning, then to me, that's no fun. I want to stay in this way of learning and just discovering things. I mean, it's intoxicating. So, and they looked at me. I don't know and I said, well, would you tell somebody who loves to read that, okay, good, you finally read all the books that you can read? No, they're just going to keep reading books because
Exactly,
it's amazing.
Yeah. That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what draws me to any endeavor is the learning process. Of course, I think, there's stages to it. When I got interested in painting, you go through, it's like binge watching a show on Netflix. I mean, you suck in everything that you can read and watch, and then you go to the workshops, and then wait a minute, I got to remember to actually do what I'm learning, and start painting. But you're in this binge mode, and then you get into maintenance mode is not the right word. But you keep learning. Now you've got the nuances. You can add on.
Like I think of it like this. You described it very well. In fact, I thought of it at some of these workshops, some of these learning experiences, as somebody hands you a set of keys, and you have unlimited doors in front of you. You can go as far as you want, but you have to figure out which key goes with which door and which one are you going to choose and where are you going to go. And you can backtrack, you can do whatever you want, but you have to figure out the way. Somebody can't. It's not about copying somebody's demo or learning how they mix this color for a rock or a tree. It's not about that. And a lot of times, and at one time I thought that was how it was too. How do you mix that color and how exactly do you do that? So I'm not diminishing that knowledge. You can cross that bridge or go through that door, learning how to mix colors well. That's great. But then it's what are you going to do with that? It's up to the individual to find that way. And that's not easy. That could be pretty tough, in fact.
Yeah.
And there's going to be some dark moments where you feel like you're going backwards. So you're talking about assimilating new information. So it's basically understanding that information, holding it in short-term memory, practicing it until it becomes more fluid knowledge. And then hopefully we get to the stage, where it becomes intuitive. And it doesn't have to all be complicated or, wait, what did Christine just say again? What is that about knowledge? I mean, if you think about, I recently, now my kids are older, I watched them learn how to drive, and
scariest moment of your life, right?
Exactly. Well, actually, my husband did most of the education because it turns out some people might say I could teach art, but I guess I'm too nervous as a driver. So I gave that job to him. But he was very patient with the kids. And, one of the things that they talk about, I taught them some, but it's this moment of, okay, this is what the brake pedal is for. And here's the handbrake. And make sure you turn on the signal when you're turning. And, if I need milk at the grocery store, my mind is wandering about, the color of the sky, and I'm paying attention to the drive, but I'm not thinking about my turn signal. I'm not thinking about the brake pedal. So that's an example of turning the tool, the assimilation of knowledge, the collection of data. And I talk about this phenomena as your brain gets it before your painting hand does. So for my kids, it was, don't worry, your brain is taking this information in, and as you practice, it will become long-term memory. It will become fluid knowledge how to drive.
So and that's the key then. Yeah. The practice.
Yeah. And you can space out like mom and go get milk at the store and think about the color of the sky. Great.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I want to explore this just a little bit more. You clearly have a love of teaching, and it came through in the demo that I went through. What's the best way for a student to get the most out of a workshop?
Oh, that's a good question. It's going to vary somewhat to the individual, but I just can't emphasize enough what a turning point that was for me when I said, I'm just going to set aside all of my preconceived notions. It's almost like entering a workshop as a new, fresh individual. You're a beginner again. And it's important not to, you can come to points where, especially as you move along in your journey, you're thinking, well, so-and-so told me this, and in this book I read this, and so here's two conflicting.
Well, this is what Bob Ross said.
Right,
Bob Ross doesn't do it that way.
Right. Well, you could even, it could be very much to the point where the teacher is citing, let's say, Edgar Payne, and you have this moment where you're like, okay, so the sky should be this shape, but Edgar Payne does it this way. And they just had this as a good example. So you have like this jumble of ideas in your head. And so you're trying to be a clean slate and assimilate new information, but then there's conflict. That's a little bit different. Mm-hmm. That's starting at ground zero and questioning everything. But I'm not explaining it well, maybe. It's basically...
No, I get you. I'll tell you from a student standpoint. I haven't been to very many, okay? So, and the workshop experiences I've been to have been good. But there's always that one person. There's always that one person that questions the teacher. I mean, and I'm thinking, I didn't pay you to attend this workshop. Right. I paid this person.
I guess that's it, because I was trying to maybe say that nicely. That
I wasn't very nice, was I? But I'm a paying customer. I didn't pay that person.
Right, but it goes back to one of the other things we were talking about, which is usually if somebody is there saying, well, so-and-so told me to paint this way, or, oh, I have a question. I watched this demo and I have this DVD. And oh, by the way, I studied with this person. So they're trotting out their knowledge of what is, and they're questioning the instructor. And also, usually what is happening is they're not trying the new thing. They're just questioning it flat out. And I actually understand that sentiment, because I guess that's what I was trying to describe before, using too many words. But it's this idea of, well, now I have a jumble of ideas. How do I sift through it? I think that's what the student is really trying to ask. And they might be coming from an insecure point, wanting to let the class know that I studied with so-and-so and I studied with so-and-so. But I think at the heart of it is a good question. How do I make sense of multiple data pieces, basically?
Exactly, yeah.
And that goes back to me trying to understand. So visual art is one thing. It's pretty straightforward and clear. Words can be clumsy because we're describing concepts and things of that nature to describe visual things. So usually I try to make sure that every student understands you can either like what I say or not like what I say, but either way, you have learned something about yourself. So in the end, it's going to be what the individual takes from that learning experience. Well, Christine told me all this stuff about water and it conflicts with everything else I heard. And so the takeaway from that is not, now we have confusing pieces of information. It's like, let's examine all of these pieces and which one feels good to you.
Yeah, they're like frameworks. Which framework are you going to use?
Yeah. So do you want to try this avenue? Do you want to? And it could be, here's another example. I talk about warm and cool colors, and I talk about perspective, and I talk about understanding value. Sometimes I talk about it in different ways because I'm hoping that one way will stick. I mean, there's always the thought process of you have to explain an idea for about 10 times before the brain gets it. And, you know, I volunteered in my kids' kindergarten class, and I think I was talking to the teacher about that, and it just kind of stuck. And she's like, yeah, you know, we present it in all different ways, and the young brains, and this is just with education in general. This is what you learn. And I just found that so fascinating that the idea can be presented. And I've even had students say, I've heard this lecture on warm and cool colors before, and they're so excited. They're like, I got it today. And
nice.
It's the same lecture, but they call me. They're like, on the drive home, I saw the warm shadows. I saw the cool shadows. And they're like euphoric that so their brain has been tumbling around these ideas, and then just something clicks and they can use that information for. And they're beyond excited, because what is happening is it gets transferred to this point of, I fully internalize this and I get it now. And now I'm going to use the heck out of that information. And it's just so exciting. So I think we're all after that, you know, to be able to draw better, to see color better, to mix it better. And sometimes it feels like a long journey to gather those skills.
Well, I'm early in that journey, so I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to embrace the process.
Well,
but I am enjoying it. It is fun. It really is fun. I do enjoy it. There is a measure of stress with it, because I think when you get older, I don't know.
Well, what's your bugaboo at a workshop, if you don't mind me asking? Because I think it's kind of interesting to get your, to kind of establish, like, oh, I always have trouble with this, or when I'm at a workshop, I feel like I don't learn anything because I, spend too long on a painting or something like that. So what happens for you?
I think I'm still in that learning the muscle memory part of it. Academically, I can understand values. Academically, I can understand color. Academically, I can understand design. I understand, I think, but you see, I think what happens too is, and I think this happens with older people who have been in a profession. You're in a profession, and you become, lack of a better word, it doesn't sound humble at all, but it's you become an expert. And so now what you think is, because I was an expert in that, this should be a piece of cake. And it's nothing. Right. It is not a piece of cake. It's like going back to finger painting 101.
That's right. It's humbling.
Yeah. So part of it is learning the humility of it. The other part for me is learning all the individual pieces. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. I remember riding a bicycle, learning how to. It was humiliating. It was scary, because you were trying to. Yeah, how do I stop this thing? How do I pedal it? How do I steer it? How do I stay balanced? So that is where I am in that process. The teachers that I've had have been more than generous. They have done an outstanding job conveying that information. But really, I think it boils down to is, I have to practice. I have to practice more and more and more, and eventually, it'll become the muscle memory when I want to create the cool color and the warm colors and the getting the values right. Just making my hands do what's in my mind, as you said eloquently earlier.
Well, I'm glad to hear you talk about all of that, because I think for a while I just felt like I was making lateral moves. Like I had the tools, and it's like, well, what are you going to say with your art? How are you going to move forward? And I think for people who are trying to better themselves, whether it's, like you're saying, an educated person that became proficient and did a really good job at their job. I mean, that you fit in somewhere, you can learn skills, you can be of value to society and perform a job that you can actually make money at. So you're a functioning human in that regard. And so what's up with this painting thing, and how come I can't get better?
What's with that?
So, there is that component that it's, and I like how you talk about the professional who's good at I've even had other people say, do you know that's so-and-so? They work on Capitol Hill. And I'm like, well, they're student like anybody else in the class. And I try to just, or other people will say, well, I was an accountant and this feels like the best thing ever because it has nothing to do with numbers and I love it. So, people will bring their prior experience, whether they're leaving it behind or, it's problem solving, and they can get into that aspect of the painting. So, but it is interesting to think about that. But you're talking about practice, and gosh, you need to practice more. You do, but I think it needs to be thoughtful practice. I mean, I'm not like sitting here diagnosing you.
This is good info. Yeah.
I just, in reflecting upon so for a long time, I was on edge. I'm like, well, how do I get better? Well, these people have this and I don't. And how do I get to this level? And I just felt like I was beating myself up with that. And it was really only after slowing down and saying, look, I have kids at home. I have healthy kids at home. I'm happy. I'm going to teach on the side. I'm doing my, commissions of children's scripts on the side. I have some good stuff. And so to be like appreciative of what I had, and then to be humble about learning the new skills. And so I became thoughtful about, I think I could be better at drawing. So single out that task.
Right.
I think I could be more thoughtful about learning color. Single out that task, study that aspect. I think I could be more thoughtful about composition. And so these were some of the decisions about taking workshops. I wanted to learn more about grays and how to mix color. And that's in the end why I chose Scott Christensen as an instructor to study with. Ironically, he had phthalo green on his palette. And I remember asking him, why do you, I thought you were like all about grays and neutrals. And I'm thinking, gosh, that's why I took your workshop. What's phthalo green? Like I took phthalo green off of because it's
just
such
ruined
a
our
color,
worldview, right?
It's like a poisonous color that pollutes everything it touches, you know? And he's like, well, I did that for a while, but I decided to experiment with it. I had taken it away for so long that I decided to bring it back because what was I afraid of? So there you go. Somebody at that level who's going to experiment with something that he had shunned a long time ago. And so I was like, wow, this is going to be a great workshop because, he's trying new things. He's going to talk about maybe, assessing that crazy color that I had even given up as a more colorful painter. But so that idea of really selective practice and furthering your goals based on singling something out instead of, I need, umpteen million hours and a pile of 6x8 studies in order to get better. Is like task studies almost.
Well,
does that make sense?
Yes, I think that's, I think it makes great sense. And I guess that's how I approach learning because it's overwhelming to me to try to do everything. I just have to focus in on one thing, one or two things, and try to, master that and go forward. So, and that's true of anything. If you're learning how to play the ukulele, you need to learn the four basic chords, and learn the rhythm and all that. And eventually you can play 90% of all, popular songs with that, but you still got to learn those basics there. How do you finger that?
Right.
Not that I know how to play ukulele, but.
Well, right. I'd like to say something about the art journey in that regard. And that is that, it's, again, I owe my students a debt of gratitude for helping me to understand this process, because what I was experiencing when I was a teen was the upset point of, gosh, I want to get better, but not knowing how. And of course, then you have, growing up and all of that stuff as well thrown in the mix as to why, I described myself at one point as an unreachable student and so difficult, didn't want any input at all. But I think there's something to be said for understanding the artistic journey. In the beginning, there's euphoria of, look at me, I'm pushing paint around. This feels so good. And just the excitement of materials, and I'm outside and I'm painting blue for the sky, and that feels really good. And then as you progress, I see a progression. I see it in my students. I saw it with my kids. They do art. And I see it only now in hindsight for myself.
Oh, wow.
But so this idea of there's a visual thing, we're excited about that. We want to grab for it. And then the excitement of just making something. It's the tactile sensation of just pushing paint around. That feels good. So there are times when you start to reach for a little bit more knowledge. And first of all, that feels a little bit scary because you're stepping outside a fun play zone, right?
Yes.
So so you're mixing blue and you put it on your painting for sky. So what if we start asking questions about that? How does that blue sky relate to the trees? There's going to be certain points where, so for example, let's say it's somebody's first time ever painting and they're like, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm liking the blue paint on the canvas. This feels really good. And so that's their moment. They're just having fun with the materials. It's later that questions get asked. Wait, is the sky lighter or darker? Hey, is that the idea of value that somebody mentioned? And then there's going to be a point at which you start to develop your critical eye. So, Carl, it sounds like that's what you're doing, is you're starting to develop your critical eye, and don't be afraid of it. It can start to undermine your feel good, I'm pushing paint, which you want to capture some of that. But you can't be afraid to continue to develop your critical eye. And the more you work on it, the more critical it's going to be. Your sky isn't good because the blue is too bossy. Look at that value. It's the same as your trees. What were you thinking? So instead to harness that and say, okay, well, this week I'm working on value, and let me take a picture of this. Let me strip it to black and white. Like, use nuts and bolts tools to help you to understand and get a grip on that. And maybe even going back to, like I was talking about before, sketching the outline of your trees against the sky. Maybe in the end, it's really all of your trees are lump, the same size. So by just changing the shape, you're actually going to enhance the color of your sky because the painting just looks more interesting then. So it could be different things, but this idea of developing your critical eye, you just can't be afraid of that, because that's what's going to keep you on your toes, keep you moving forward. That's what eventually breaks down perhaps that brick wall that you've built for yourself. That was the turning point for me. I'm just like, I'm just going to keep, I'm going to be ruthless in the fact that it's, what do I want to say? How can I say it to the best? How can I build my arsenal of tools to support my vision of my painting and what I want to say? And when do I say, you know what? I learned all of that. I'm interested in urban sketching with pens. So maybe I've just tried that for a little bit of time. It could be a non sequitur of, let's try something a little different. And then maybe you learn one or two components of that and bring it back to what your main journey that you were working on. So,
and I'm going to have to send you a check now.
But it's that artistic journey that, so people fall by the wayside with that. I try to bolster my students up. I'm like, don't be afraid. Look back 2 years. Look at the work that you were doing before and to see now your greens are so much better. This is so much better. We worked on these target items. And they're like, yeah, that's true. That's true. So this is a fact that staying in that arena of being uncomfortable with your own work and having a relentless eye go over your pieces. This can be uncomfortable to make peace with that for a lot of people. And once you label it as what it is, then it's like, well, we just talked about that. So that's not so scary. Maybe I could try that. That's the first step to really, pushing forward, I think.
I appreciate that. And that is, I think you've nailed it right on the head there. That's my fear has been that I would not recognize the difference between, in my work, naive art and fine art. And to me, naive art, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I my first exposure to art was Bob Ross. I mean, that's but I'm not ashamed to say it because he got me thinking. But I realized soon that his art doesn't look anything like Thomas Morand or Albert Bierstadt or Edgar Payne. There's a difference, and I want to make that difference in my art. But there's a lot of people who are content to do that. They don't even recognize that that's right. What they're doing. I mean,
this is the difference of aesthetic.
Yeah.
Somebody is going to want to say something visually and they're going to go into cartooning. Somebody else is going to love Bob Ross and, maybe they, for whatever reason, that aesthetic speaks to them. So
yeah,
usually
and I'm not knocking it.
That's right. I mean, it could be anything. Like there's some artists, they paint with, a lot of pink and red. I actually had a gallery one time say, could you put more red in your paintings? And I listened to them for like a minute or two. And then what I did with that painting is I repainted everything blue because I love blue and purple. And I just looked at it and I'm like, oh God, I feel so much better.
Liberated.
This just feels so much more like me. But I learned something that it wasn't good or bad necessarily what was said. It was a different aesthetic. I have mine and they had theirs. So, maybe this person wouldn't have bought my paintings to hang in their home. Maybe their home has a lot of red and burgundy in it. And, it's not like my home is filled with blue things. I mean, I have red and burgundy, but it's, we're going to go into an ice cream shop with 30 flavors and you're going to pick one thing and I'm going to pick another. So it's no judgment on either of us.
Right.
I don't know who would buy bubblegum ice cream, but, it is a flavor out there somewhere. Somebody likes it.
I sound like I was, I don't know. I don't want anybody to feel bad if that's what they like. It's just not what I wanted to do. But I think there is a positive thing. One thing I've noticed in our community here where I live is they'll have these dinners and along with dinner, you paint a scene, and it is kind of Bob Rossy type things or simple things. But people, when I see the photos and my friends are posting them on Instagram, they're so happy. And I think, well, okay, I like that. I'm glad that they're very happy, and I'm happy for them because the art is giving them an expression. They're having fun doing it, and they're doing it with friends. So I get that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I agree wholeheartedly. As I've taught different types of classes, and I've actually had people say, could we do more of the step-by-step painting? Because early on, I would try different things. And what I realized when they asked me that is that made them happy to learn that way, that now we're mixing this color. Now we're going to take this tool and apply it like this. Now most of our paintings are going to look similar because we've been walked step 1 through 100. And a lot of people find pleasure in that type of methodical progression for whatever it could be a craft, it could be the painting, it could be it could be a cooking thing. So, that methodology makes them very happy. And I realized when I was trying that out, and I did teach a couple of classes that way, that made me uncomfortable.
Mm.
It felt like work to teach that way. So, and so it's interesting. But this is another thing is it's not that that's a bad way to teach, because as you're saying, your friends are happy, they had a good evening. It was great. But I realized that, for me, I love asking questions. I love tapping into, okay, what do you want to say? And, that's not going to be my style of teaching, might not be for everybody. Sometimes there's a challenge involved, and you might not even get a final trophy painting at the end. Maybe your painting didn't work out, but you tried something new. So I do try to push people in a certain respect for challenging ideas. I mean, I try not to push them too far till they're, Christine, what are you doing? But I try to target the things that will move them along, but on an individual path. And that to me is that gets me excited about teaching. And I feel like I learn from my students. I mean, they ask great questions. I hear the problems that they have, and it makes me think about things in a new way. Like, oh, they're working with this. Well, maybe I should have like a little breakout demo about that little thing.
Cool.
And so, so I like it, and it's the polar opposite. Again, it's not this way is good, this way is bad. It's just in hearing about the one way, it helps me to push my teaching to a different direction. And I think that could be said for art aesthetic too.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Christine, I've had you on the phone for 2 hours. I cannot believe I've done this to you. I am so sorry.
That's okay.
I mean,
we had some equipment failure there for a while.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay.
Well, I mean, there's so much more that I could ask you about. Time at this time just doesn't permit, but your use of materials. I always like to talk about materials. It's a fun thing. That's what we do. And you have embraced water miscible oils and in your workshops being solvent free, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, it's being solvent free and educating myself on the water mixable component. In fact, I used to paint with all water mixable oils, and sometimes I still do, but my methodology now is basically an advocate for direct painting. And so I've just found a way to paint without solvent because I'm allergic to it. So I can't, it's not really a choice. I have to find a different way. And it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, well, oil paint, traditional oil paints is rather forgiving in that way. It's just a new way of, just taking the solvent out of the picture. I mean, you can wash brushes with soap and water, so it's not like you have to have a water miscible oil. So that's good.
There's a lot of transition materials. There's the Terpenoid Natural, which is a good preliminary brush cleaner, and like you said, Masters brush soap does a great job. If people are interested in what I paint and how I paint, I've written a few blog posts about starting with the water mixable oil.
And where can they find your website? I'll put this in the show notes, but let's just shout it out right quick.
So my website is christinelashley.com, and I actually have a separate website for all of my material lists, and it lists my workshops, and it's kind of my it's my website for helping students to further understand their materials, and that's Lashley Art.
Lashley Art.
Both LashleyArt.com. Those I had to separate out my classes and my paintings because one was overtaking the other.
Yeah.
So whoever wants to dig deep about supplies and know about what books I like to read and things like that, they could find it on my teaching website, LashleyArt.com. And I have sample shopping baskets for watercolor and for oil painting. And I talk about the difference between the water mixable and the traditional. And there's also some links to blog postings. I've posted a blog at Outdoor Painter, which is a blog that Plein Air Magazine is, they collect articles. And so I've written a few articles for them. And also I've written a few articles or blog posts for Oil Painters of America. There's one about flying with art supplies, and there's just kind of thought process, and you can see some visuals there too.
Yeah, they're great articles. I've got them bookmarked, so it's very nice. Hey, and you also have a book out.
I have a book out. It's about my just aesthetic of light in the landscape, and I walk through the process of gathering information outdoors and my studies, and then even into nocturnes, how I've done some cityscapes and just some of the fun I've had with that. And I'm really excited that I'm going to be having some DVDs come out. So
that is exciting.
Instructional. I know. So I finished filming that last week, and those are going to be instructional videos with, I think it's going to be with Streamline Publishing, but they also have another name they release videos under. So I'm not really sure. I haven't seen the cover yet. It's all still in post-production. But I did one demonstration of a lily pond and water reflections. And then the other one is of a city scene. And each one is going to be, I think they're doing the city scene one first. They're calling it Drama in the Landscape or Sparkle. I'm not even sure of the title yet, but it's something about basically how to add drama and pizzazz to your paintings through higher contrast and understanding basically how light works.
Yeah.
And that could be brilliant sunshine, or it could be, like I was saying before, a nocturne. And what I'm really excited about is that each one is run kind of like I would a workshop, where I'll go through I'm narrating through the whole thing. So they were basically saying, Christine, keep talking. I'm like, okay. So every paint
tell us what you're thinking.
Yes, exactly. At the paint mix, I mean, I was, there were moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm under a microscope. But really, these are the things that it's great, of course, if you could take a workshop with me, because I'm right there to answer any question that you have. But there's oftentimes when my students have said to me, I'd love to know exactly how you mix that. And can you tell us that again? So with the video, if that's really your thing, you can rewind it and watch how I mix that green, or, hear again how I laid out my palette and about the supplies. So we go through supplies, and then I go through some really simple exercises of how to start understanding our subject matter, such as the flare of lights, and how exactly would you paint a neon sign? And wait, what about water reflections? How do they even work? And so we go through just some basic exercises. I take people on location, and we talk about the things that we see, which is another hot spot of, Christine, how do you even start a painting? Well, starts by looking and seeing and getting inspired. So we look at photos, and then it's the final painting. First brush strokes to last.
Wow.
And everything in between.
I look forward to getting it. When do you think these are estimated to come out?
I think they're working on it now. I was kind of surprised. I was very happy to leave it to, these people really know what they're doing. There was a camera crew, there was a studio, and now there's going to be, so there was pre-production where we hammered out some ideas and worked on what we were going to do and where we were going to do it. And, to get like a permit to shoot on location and stuff like that. So I didn't have to think about any of those things. I just showed up with my paint. And now people are working in post-production. So I think the idea is to have this out in about a month or two.
Excellent. Yeah. So, Eric's got this down to a science. So does a really good job with that.
He's got a good team. So I'm sure there'll be, if you want to know more about it, you can either sign up on my website or with Streamline Publishing to just get notifications. And if you sign up, Eric Rhodes sends out,
actually,
here's this video is coming up. And
that's
so
a
forth.
good idea. And you're very smart to even say that. Sign up for Christine's newsletter. It's on her website. So if you do that, you know, everyone will be notified, and that's good for you. And it's good for us. Yeah.
I sent it out about 4 times a year. So 4 to 6 times a year. And it's just upcoming workshops. It's, that sometimes it's just me. So I am very hands-on with my workshops. And if somebody has a question, I'm likely the one who will answer the question about the workshop, which students seem to really like that.
Sure.
And oftentimes what I'll do is have, unlike other artists who might have a year in advance, they plan out what they're going to do. I already know I'm going to Paris in September, and I think I know the dates, but I haven't put everything together just quite yet. So the best thing to do is just to sign up to be like on the pre-notify list and just tell me what you're interested in. In the DC area, I have day workshops where I say, hey, we're going out next week to paint, and here's the location. And so I just put together, it's kind of like a pop-up plein air workshop because we watch for the weather, which has been volatile lately. But yeah.
Yeah, it'll make a studio painter out of us the way the weather's been of late. So, well, Christine, thank you so much for being on The Artful Painter. I am so grateful to you for taking the time to talk with us.
No problem. It's been my pleasure. Thanks for asking me, and great questions. And I look forward to seeing you again at Olmsted. I can't wait for that event. That's coming up soon too.
It's coming up fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Olmsted Plein Air. So sounds great. Thanks so much, Carl.
I enjoyed that conversation with Christine Lashley. I think after I clicked the record button, turned it off, I think we must have spoke for at least another hour afterwards. Big mistake on my part to turn the record button off, right? But anyway, it was great to be able to share with you at least the part that I did record. If you want to make sure you do not miss the next episode of The Artful Painter, there's 2 things you can do. One is sign up for my email list. You do that by going to carlolson.tv or theartfulpainter.com. They basically go to the same website. There's a email newsletter sign up block there or form. Just fill that in, and the next thing you know, you're signed up. Also, if you subscribe in Apple Podcast, of course, you can listen to this show and other services as well. So wherever it's convenient for you, please subscribe. That way you will not miss another episode. I do enjoy hearing from listeners of this show from around the world. I got this message from Kelly Pennington. Glad you are back. I enjoy listening to you, and good guest. Hey, Kelly, I'm glad I'm back too. I went far too long in releasing this episode, but thank you for hanging in there and listening to this podcast. The next email is from Robert Strasser. He says, good sir, thank you so much for dedicating some of your precious time on this earth to inspiring and teaching others. I hope you feel so fulfilled. Your humility, good-natured, excellent guest selection, and thought-provoking conversations are what keeps me tuned in. As a fellow newbie, there's nothing I'd rather listen to while I'm learning firsthand at the easel. I wish you great success and hope you stay inspired as well. Best, Robert Strausser from Iowa. Robert, thank you so much for those kind words. You know, I've driven through Iowa a few times. It's a beautiful place, and I've also camped there with my family many years ago when my kids were little. So anyway, so good to hear from you. The next one is from a fellow Georgian. Carl, thank you so much for your refreshing and informative podcast. I always feel as if you are in it for the sharing of artful tips and not to toot your own horn. Such a pleasure to listen to. I can't thank you enough for being the curious being that you are and for asking the right questions of your guest. Carl, you are top of my list of podcasts to listen to. G. Brannigan from St. Simon's Island. Thank you. I don't know what to say. Well, there you go. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'd like to visit St. Simon's Island sometime. I have not been to the Georgia coast in way too long, so it's time that my wife and I go there. Maybe I can do some painting when I go. And the next one's from Isaac Martinez. Thank you for putting together these podcasts. I really enjoy listening to them while I paint. I learn a lot from them to better myself as an artist. Bingo! Isaac, that's exactly why I do this podcast. I am so happy to hear it. And then finally, I had this message. It was in response to the episode featuring Gregory Packard from Sand Dollar Studios. They say, thank you, Carl. A very enjoyable episode with an exceptional and humble artist. Keep them coming. I said finally, didn't I? Actually, there is, but wait, there's more. There's one more thing. This is from David. This is in response to the very first episode of this podcast. He says, I literally just picked up brushes in the past week to learn to paint and came across your podcast. This episode and the next two I've listened to so far are excellent and seem targeted right at me. Love how well you engage with these artists from a novice but informed perspective. I found the discussions inspiring, instructional, and fun. Thank you. Well, I want to thank everyone for your feedback. Keep them coming. You may get to hear your feedback on this show in a future episode. Thank you for all your encouraging comments. They keep me going. So thank you for listening to The Artful Painter. Go out there and paint something amazing.
Picture on the TV.